Can I say, first of all, what a real pleasure it is to be back in Coventry, this great city, this great industrial city, great cathedral city, and this great city of two major universities. And I'm delighted to see the progress of Coventry University, formed as a design college 147 years ago, a university 25 years ago, now 30,000 students itself, an expanding university in technology, engineering, design, and one that makes me very proud to be here in Coventry today. And I'm very proud to be here with three great candidates who will be standing for Labour at the coming general election. Three people who know Coventry well, three people who have served Coventry with distinction, three people who I will show you why you need them in the House of Commons, and you need them to fight for all the needs that Coventry have in the future. Colleen, who was born here, at school here, at college here, a councillor here, now a great MP for her constituency area, and I know that she will serve the constituency brilliantly if you choose to return her on June the 8th. And Jim Cunningham, who was the leader of the council as well as a councillor for many years, and worked with me in Parliament for 25 years, a great member of Parliament, always attentive to the needs of his constituency, always speaking up in the Parliament of Westminster for the needs of Coventry. I'm here also with Geoffrey Robinson, and I want to tell you something about the contribution that he has made, not just when he was the Chief Executive and Managing Director of Jaguar Cars and served the car industry so well, and as an MP and advisor to Harold Wilson when he was Prime Minister, but what he achieved as a government minister in the 1990s when he came in to put through vital legislation that changed the face of Britain. I worked with Geoffrey, first of all, on what was called the windfall tax. And some of you may remember, we taxed the privatised utilities £5 billion to pay for the New Deal for young people and the long-term unemployed to get back into work. And it was a unique piece of legislation, never before done, a windfall tax on the privatised utilities, very complex, very difficult to do, and then, of course, their generosity in being so good at paying it and wanting to help the young unemployed. And it was Geoffrey who devised that. It was Geoffrey who did all the hard work to make that possible. It was Geoffrey who raised that £5 billion by the work he did. And I've got to apologise to Geoffrey, because he always told me when I was Chancellor, look, Gordon, you could get £6 billion. You shouldn't go for £5 billion, you should go for £6 billion. And Geoffrey was right. We should have taken that extra billion to help people back into work. And then what happened? As a result of it, 2 million young people into work. 2 million of the long-term unemployed got into work. And once we did the minimum wage, we were able to get 2 million low-paid workers up to a level of income that was far better than ever before. And so the Welfare to Work programme derived from the amazing work that Geoffrey did. And then we said we had to do something about pensioners. And you may remember in 1997, a third of pensioners in this country were in poverty. It's a terrible figure to think that 1 in every 3 elderly people were in poverty and unable to meet the costs of basic necessities. So Geoffrey and I thought, we've got to do something in addition to the basic pension, so we set up the pension credit, which 2 million pensioners are now benefiting from, taking them out of poverty. And then we thought we had to do something for all pensioners, so then we said this Christmas bonus is not good enough, so we'll create the winter allowance. And so the winter allowance, Geoffrey then went round all the privatised utilities again and asked them to be generous again in giving money for the winter allowance. But in the end, the Treasury paid for the winter allowance, which with the pension tax credit has been responsible for reducing pensioner poverty from 33% of the population to just around 10% when we left office. And my sadness, and this is one of the reasons why you need the 3 champions in Westminster, is that pensioner poverty is starting to rise again. And the prediction is that by 2022, if Mrs May is re-elected, another 400,000 elderly people will be pushed into poverty. So there's one very good reason to elect Colleen and Geoffrey and Jim. If you want to end pensioner poverty, you need Labour MPs fighting for it, and you need your 3 representatives from Coventry doing that, and I hope you will support them to do that at the election. Now, Mrs May has called an election on a single issue. And I was thinking back, and some of you here may remember and some of you not, the last time a Prime Minister called an election on a single issue, it was Edward Heath in 1974. And he had a simple question. He said, "Who governs the country?" And the answer came back, "Not Edward Heath." He was thrown out of office. And Mrs. May says she wants this single issue election to strengthen her hand with Europe. But as Jeffrey has just said, we don't know what her hand is. She is not telling us what her hand is in these negotiations. And it is to be at the cost of manufacturing, at the cost of the car industry, and at the cost of jobs if we are not told what we are voting for on June the 8th. She wants a free hand. She wants us to write her a blank cheque. She wants us to give her, if she was going to use the language in French, carte blanche, to do exactly what she wants. Now, nobody in this city can afford to give a Prime Minister a blank cheque when the jobs of car workers, when the future of manufacturing, when the prospects of young people are a central issue in this election, and they must be addressed. And Jeffrey is absolutely right. There are 45,000 people employed by Jaguar Land Rover in the West Midlands. There are 170,000 people employed in the car industry throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. There are nearly 800,000 people who are dependent on these jobs in the supply industry, in the industries servicing the car industry. There are 2.7 million men and women employed in manufacturing industry. And they need to have answers before this election about what is to happen to manufacturing in these European negotiations. And you will need champions in the House of Commons, Jim and Colleen and Jeffrey, to speak up for the needs of manufacturing industry in the Midlands, and particularly the needs of people in Coventry. You know, we hear a lot about the European Court of Justice and how we must push that out of the way. We hear a lot about the customs union and the bureaucracy. We hear a lot about the single market and why it's not right for Britain to stay part of that. But which minister and which Conservative candidates are talking about the future of manufacturing industry? Who are talking about the future of the car industry and how much it depends on trade with the European Union? Who are talking from the government about the apprenticeships and about the young people whose future should lie in the car industry but whose jobs may be at risk? And as Jeffrey rightly said, I've looked at opinion polls too on these issues, and whether you're a Leave voter or whether you are a Remain voter, everyone agrees almost unanimously that it's in the interest of Britain to negotiate free trade with the European Union so that we can sell our cars, we can sell our pharmaceuticals, we can sell our manufacturing products without taxation as you enter the European Union, without customs regulations that prevent things getting through quickly, and without rules of origin, which is a technical term, preventing us selling British cars to third countries outside the European Union. So manufacturing has got to be on the ballot paper. The future of the car industry has got to be on the ballot paper. The future of jobs have got to be on the ballot paper. And there are three things that we must demand that this government do. And there are three reasons, therefore, why you need advocates in the House of Commons who will speak up for the car and manufacturing industries of this country and who will not be silenced because they're part of a Conservative party in the House of Commons. They will speak up for the needs of Coventry and the needs of the people in this region. The first thing we need is tariff-free access to the European Union. If there are tariffs, there would be 10%. So the cost of a car selling into Europe would be £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 more. It would make us less competitive and perhaps even make us uncompetitive. And you know how many cars go from Britain to the European Union every year? To mainland Europe. Half the cars that are produced in Britain are sold into mainland Europe, and most of the cars produced in Britain are sold to other countries and exported abroad. That's the difference from the old regime in the 1960s and 70s. Our car industry has been reborn, selling cars into some of the most competitive markets in the world, in the European Union, beating the Germans, beating the French, beating other countries in our ability to produce cars that people want to buy in the European Union. But tariffs and taxes on these cars make it very much more difficult for Jaguar Land Rover and for any of the other car manufacturers to sell. So we must say We need champions in the House of Commons who will say we cannot allow the car industry to have tariffs and taxes imposed on it simply because some people refuse to work with the European Union and the single market. And the second thing we need, as Jeffrey himself said, we need frictionless access for parts and components to move freely back and forward from Europe. You know, 40% of the cars, of what is in the cars produced in Britain, come from components and parts that are made in the rest of Europe. So parts are going back and forward, components are going back and forward from Europe into Britain, back to Europe, back to Britain, and a car is made up from a global, but particularly a European supply chain. So you can't have vast customs rules and regulations, otherwise you're going to slow up the production of cars. It's just been said by Ford today that they would have to reconsider all their plans if there were these regulations and rules preventing them being able to get their components and parts back and forward as quickly as possible. So we need members of Parliament who are attentive to the needs of the car industry, not dogma-ridden on the question of Europe, but willing to say this is necessary for the car industry, this is necessary for manufacturing. And we also need something that allows us to sell our cars to third countries. And that's how people see these cars. If they're British cars, but with European parts, they've still got to be seen as British cars and able to enter places that are outside the European Union where we want to buy. And so for these three reasons, we need advocates, we need champions, and the best champions, the best advocates of manufacturing in the car industry are the three people that you've got before you today who will stand up and fight for the car industry and manufacturing in the House of Commons. And it's not... And you know, Mrs may want to fight a general election on one theme, but as Edward Heath found in 1974, he wanted to fight on one issue, but people wanted to talk also about what matters at a general election. You're choosing a government for 5 years. What are they going to do about security and defence? What are they going to do about the public services? What's the policy for education? What's the policy for the National Health Service? What are they going to do about poverty and inequality? And we need answers, straight answers to these questions, and not just slogans and sound bites that we're receiving from the Conservative Party at the moment. Now take the National Health Service. And this is what makes me really sad, because the three candidates here are part of a party that created the National Health Service and built the National Health Service up. And I believe after 1997, by tripling the money we spent on the National Health Service, building new hospitals, new health centres, hiring more nurses, we helped to save the National Health Service from what would have been privatisation under a Conservative government. But you know what is happening to the health service now. 25,000 people who did not get their cancer treatment within the 62 days promise that was made by the government. So 25,000 people waiting more than the 2 months that was required by the rules governing the health service that they would be treated in time, and last year were not treated in time. 2.5 million people who went to accident and emergency last year and had to wait more than 4 hours, despite the promise that was made by the last Labour government and continued by this Conservative government that you'll be seen within 4 years. Now that's 2.5 million people who spent time waiting because a promise has been broken. And then what about waiting lists? Now 4 million people on health service waiting lists. An absolute scandal that the Health Secretary has been able to announce, and the Conservative Party will do nothing about it, that he cannot meet the target that you'll be treated within 18 weeks. And so on three vital promises that Labour made, the Conservatives promised to honour, they said the health service was safe in their hands. Look at what is happening now. And to pay the bills of the health service, 1.2 billion taken out of the capital budget this year to put into the revenue budget, so future hospital building and future health centre building will stall as a result of these changes. Now just ask yourself, is the National Health Service safe with the Conservative candidates, or the UKIP candidates, or the Liberal candidates in Coventry? Or is it safe with the people that have always fought for the health service, that supported the extra funding, that made the promises and want to see them keep, that will hold the government to account on the National Health Service? I say to you, the National Health Service is safe only in the hands of Labour people who will fight every day for the resources that it needs. And you know, there was a nurse last week who said that her pay was now so poor and her childcare costs so high and the family responsibilities she had to meet to feed her children, that she herself was having to attend and get support from a food bank. And then in Glasgow last week, you may have seen it, it was announced that the food bank had run out of food because the demand was now so great that the food bank in Glasgow, in that part of Glasgow, couldn't meet it. And this is what shames us about what's happening to Britain today. You know, under Mrs. Thatcher, child poverty went to 3 million in the 1980s. 3 million children denied the basic necessities, unable to fulfil their potential as a result of the poverty and deprivation their family faced. And by the time the Conservatives left office, it had gone up to 4 million amongst the Thatcher major ministers who'd allowed child poverty to rise. And then dramatically it came down. Child benefit was raised under Labour, the child tax credit was brought in, Sure Start, and many more measures like nursery education for 3-year-olds, so that we not only met the financial needs of families, but met the educational needs of children. But I tell you, and we should not be blind to this, child poverty is on the rise again. Mrs. May says she wants to unite the country, but she will leave it more socially divided than ever unless there is a change of policy. And child poverty was at 3.9 million 2 years ago again. It's now up to 4.1 million. And like inequality, it is rising. And I tell you, there is despair in many communities that these ministers never visit. And they need champions to speak up in the House of Commons to say that child poverty is eroding essential values of our society, that every single child should have a decent chance in life. And you see, that's the difference, and that's why we need our champions here, Colleen, Jim and Geoffrey, to fight in the House of Commons every day. Attention to the needs of children. They should be on the ballot paper. Even although they don't have votes, they need to have voices, and these 3 candidates will be your voices against child poverty in the House of Commons. And there is a basic difference. I'm not saying that other candidates are uncaring or lack compassion, but the Tories, they get up in the morning and they think about how they can make the market economy and the free market work for them. The Liberals get up in the morning, as far as I've seen in my experience in politics, they get up in the morning and think how they can form coalitions with people and find a way into government, even although they never get majority support. I don't know if any UKIP people wake up in the morning anymore, because I don't know if there's any more UKIP people. But I tell you this, the Labour people I know, and the Labour candidates you've got here, they wake up in the morning and think every day, how can we advance the cause of social justice? How can we help more children escape poverty? How can we help pensioners stop having to choose between heating and eating? How can we help families make the best of their lives given the circumstances they face? And what has happened? Child benefit has gone up 2% from 2010, and it will be frozen right up to 2020. 2%. But prices have gone up 35% for the ordinary family. The working tax credit that we brought in to help low-paid workers, it's gone up 4% between 2010 and 2020. And that means that it's gone up by 9 times less than the rate of inflation. Housing benefit no longer covers the rents that people have to pay. The social fund has been abolished as a national fund. And so it's hardly surprising that if you freeze the help that's available, then poverty starts rising. But what Mrs. May doesn't seem to understand is that 2/3 of the children in poverty, 2 out of every 3, are in working families. People who are working every hour that they can, but cannot make ends meet as a result of 0 contract wages, as a result of other indignities at the workplace which are forcing people to accept poverty pay, and they cannot bring up their family on that. Now, we wake up in the morning thinking, how can we advance the cause of working families who are not getting a fair deal at the moment? When Mrs. May says she's for those people who are just getting by, the Conservative Party are walking by on the other side and ignoring these needs. And I say this is the difference, and this is why you need Labour candidates elected to Parliament to fight and champion and be the advocates of this cause of social justice. We can't be wholly happy when so many people are in difficulty. We can't be truly at ease when there are so many people who are ill at ease. We can't feel secure about our future and the future of children in this country when so many millions of people are insecure. And this is the difference between the parties and the difference between the candidates here in Coventry and what they stand for. You know, it's not anti-wealth to say that those people who have lots of wealth should do more to help people who are not so wealthy. It's not anti-enterprise to say that those people who've made their fortunes by enterprise should do more to help those people who haven't had the chance to be enterprising. And it's not anti-market to say that markets are free, yes, but they cannot be values-free. They've got to be based on morality. You know, I was reading the other day about the person who founded the game Monopoly. It's the most cutthroat game. Winner takes all, fight to the finish. You'd think it was capitalism at its barest. But the founder of the game of Monopoly actually had two parts to the game, because she recognised that there was one part which was winner takes all, but there was another part she devised that was eventually dropped in the game when it was produced, and that was going around the board and sharing the benefits of what you gained, and agreeing to pay fair taxes when you bought land. And her view was that that would show people that prosperity for all, prosperity could be shared, and only prosperity that could be shared would be sustainable prosperity for the long run. And you see, we stand for principles that we have got a duty to promote. Now, yes, politics goes in cycles. You can be up, as we were in the 1960s, and then down in the 70s. You can be up in 1997 and down by the 2010s. You can be the darlings of the media, as Labour was for some time, and yet the very same media is now telling you you're the enemies of the people. So yes, politics go in cycles. You know, the test, however, is what you do in the difficult times, is that you don't lose the courage to fight for what you believe in. You don't stand back and say, this is now not for me, it's too difficult. That you continue to fight and support and champion what really matters to the future of this country. I'll end with one small story. There was a famous book, you remember, Clockwork Orange, and it was done by Anthony Burgess, who was a great writer who I had the privilege of meeting, and I heard this story about this book. It became the famous film by Stanley Kubrick, and you know what it is? It's a cycle of decline, never-ending pessimism, never-ending disasters happening to this young boy who chooses the wrong way to live his life. And Anthony Burgess wrote the book and then sold it to a British publisher who bought it. But then when it went to America, the publisher in America said, look, I don't like the last chapter. Can you just do chapters 1 to 20? And we'll drop chapter 21. And on that basis, the book became the film based on the American version, and Anthony Burgess regretted what he'd done to sell for some money the book without chapter 21. Because chapter 21 turned the whole book on its head. The man who had been in this cycle of despair and decline suddenly changed his way. Things got better. It was actually a chapter of hope and not a chapter of hopelessness. That things can get better, that things can improve, that things can be made better. Now, it's our duty. It's our duty to show this country that there is a better way forward. When it comes to the National Health Service, there is absolutely no doubt. If you want to defend the health service, you must vote for the three Labour candidates, Colleen, Jim and Geoffrey. If you want to defend jobs in the car industry, it's absolutely clear. The evidence is so clear. You need these champions in the House of Commons. Otherwise, the car industry and manufacturing will not be taken seriously. And if you're thinking of the future and thinking of the children of this country, then there can be no doubt who is going to stand up for the children of this country, who is going to speak up for the needs, who is going to the people that speak up for that chapter 21, a future that is brighter and better and is not just more poverty and more lost jobs and more deprivation and more hardship for so many families. I say to you today, stand and support these three candidates in Coventry at the election on June the 8th. Support them as they put the case for the needs of working families in this area. And by supporting these families and by standing with them, you can be sure that when they are re-elected, if you choose to do so, they will always stand with you. Thank you very much.